Great. Okay, so my presentation today is actually quite a personal story. I'm going to be talking to you about service through my ears. So, a little bit about me. I have been in the industry for about 12 plus years, starting from email design, going through to UI, UX throughout the world. So, quite a varied career to date. And the past 7 years, I've been at Emirates. Also an avid traveller, but possibly most key to this point is I am a hearing aid wearer and have been since the age of 4. As it's probably quite apparent from my accent, I am not South African, but I do have a fondness for the country. And actually, my story today begins in South Africa, where during 2009, I volunteered in South Africa on a teaching project. This was during the start of my travels. And I went to this school in Cape Town. And they already had a more than capable teacher. They didn't need me to do just general teacher admin support systems. I wanted to bring in something they would remember. So what I did have was my stories from around the world. I'd done a fair bit of travelling by this point. I bought that giant globe, as you can see, which was quite entertaining. At one point, it did actually get a puncture. So there is a photo somewhere in the distance of me at a petrol station in the middle of Cape Town getting this repaired, which I'm sure made quite a change from the usual tyre punctures. I had some resources to work with. I had paper, I had photocopier, I had pens. But something that Iggy alluded to earlier is observation. Actually, while these weren't necessarily my stakeholders, these children, they were 5 years old. So what would they be interested in? Which, for the most part, was not a lot. But they loved colouring. So something I came up with was, how could I combine all of that into something that I could teach that was different, that they would enjoy and they would learn? So I actually spent each day building out worksheets for them to learn the different flags of the country, learn the different capital cities. And at the one place I hadn't been to then was Antarctica. So I challenged them to use their imagination of what they believed Antarctica would look like. And I've never seen so many pictures of penguins and goodness knows what in my life, and it was wonderful to see. So I wasn't just teaching there, I designed something that they would enjoy. And I didn't really realise what that was at the moment. It was just, I was curious of what interested them. I wanted it to be something they enjoyed. I wanted it to be something that they would get out of it. And I got a lot out of that. I got a real sense of being able to open their eyes to even more, picking on things that they knew and going, well, did you know there's a tabletop mountain here, but there's also one there, and igniting their passion and interest that way. So, a little bit about me, a bit again, I'm sorry. I can, as you can tell, I can hear to some extent. I can speak. I am very lucky in that sense that I am both in the hearing world, but also part of the deaf community. So for me, the biggest challenges I face on a day-to-day basis have got nothing to do with digital. If anything, digital makes my life easier every day. We have hearing devices that pair to Bluetooth, we have captions and subtitles, we have live transcribe, we have settings on phones that can alert to different types of sounds. It's fantastic. The world has become a lot easier with technology. But there's some parts of the world that haven't changed, and that's things around the environment that can still have an impact. If that's noise, if it's echoes, if, believe it or not, the lighting, whether I can see people to lip read them, if there's crowds because it blocks the line of sight, or if there's one conversation happening near me and there's another and you can't work out which one's going on. Those are the sort of things that can make it more challenging to get by. So I'm going to take you away from South Africa now and back to the UK. This is a little village hall in the middle of Northamptonshire. So picture a village hall, a very typical rural English town, and a group class where I went to go and try a yoga class. So I went up to the instructor and explained, look, I can't hear very well. I wear hearing aids, but don't worry, it's fine. I'll just watch people. I'll figure it out. I might be a little bit behind everyone, but I'll get there. Don't worry. I never asked her to change anything. I had my ways to adapt and work it out and accept I would probably look a bit stupid. But much to my surprise, when I turned up the following week, Rosa walked over to me with this piece of paper where she had drawn out every single position that she was going to do in that class so that I could follow by myself. Now look, this wasn't something super fancy, this wasn't polished, this was just one person deciding that actually I want this person to be able to follow this class as well, and that how I felt mattered. Now, it gets better. The following weeks, this got more and more refined. Not only did I have all the pictures, I also now had the instructions, and I also had what I couldn't necessarily pick up before is what she'd introduced at the beginning of the intention of those classes and what she was basing the whole theme around. And this became something that she would hand out to all the class, not just me. And I was part of the whole experience now, as well as everyone else. So, look, Rosa didn't have to do this. Like, she's just scared. This is not someone who was a UX designer or was necessarily thinking about anything like this, but she did follow a design process. She observed, or in this case, listened to what I've explained. She then went away and thought, oh, I want that person to experience my class as well. And she designed for that. She then bought me that first version and tested it, essentially by me saying, yeah, I could follow that. And she iterated on that and then scaled it to something she could use for the whole class. So just that one piece of paper went from me just catching some of it. It's very, very hard to hear instructions when you're in downward dog, watching everyone else, playing catch up, feeling a little bit self-conscious, to me being able to follow along, to being confident, to, if I didn't quite hear the instructions of the move, I had them there to follow myself, and actually feeling confident with it. One thing I will say is I didn't necessarily get any better at yoga, but I'll take the win that I could at least keep up with the class. So look, when it comes to things like hearing or vision, we are constantly used to having to adapt to these things. We kind of got used to the fact that the world might not necessarily work for us in that instance. But when we no longer have to, and someone has gone out their way to do that, it's something we don't forget. And just to put that into context, this first sheet I showed you is from 12 years ago. This is a yoga class I can remember from 12 years ago. So if that sort of thing can have an impact for a set of yoga classes, imagine what that would do if you scaled it up to airports and airlines. Which brings me on to my present day, the current role I do, and where that falls into it. So I work as part of the digital experience team at Emirates. My day-to-day role is actually websites, apps, self-service kiosks, anything digital. But if you think about the travel experience as a whole, it is the most complex service design challenge known to man. The amount of organisations involved, the difference in communication, the level of sound, of noise, of everything you've got to go through to get yourself from your home to checked in, to through security, to through the concourse, to the gate, to on the plane, to off the other side, everything that's involved, it does lead to significant challenges, both for the customer itself and for organisations to provide a continuity across the board. So look, I've alluded to this earlier, but something I do want to point out is, people that experience the most friction actually become the experts at hiding it. We develop our own workarounds, we adapt, and, organisations think the service works because people get from A to B. But what they don't necessarily realise is the customers learn to work their way through it and what works for them. And there is something around the idea of disclosure, whether you would feel comfortable to explain to an organisation if you're deaf or you're hard of hearing, whichever terminology you wish. And that does have its uses at times, but there's also an element of being quite stubborn and independent about it. So I want to touch on this idea of a workaround. So let's say you need to board the plane, you're travelling alone, you can't hear the announcements. How would you know it's time to board? So I've listed a couple of scenarios that I have asked. I've asked other travellers, which feels weird because they might not even know. You can ask a member of staff, and yet they'll come and help you, and they'll sometimes come and get you when it's time to get on the plane. That's great. If there's not necessarily staff around, you can wait and follow the crowd. You could do a bit of like head gymnastics and peer around at people's boarding passes and hope that you can read what boarding gate that or boarding group that is. You could either look to staff holding the boards, which you sometimes see, but even that comes down to whether it's in your line of sight. Or you can guess. The worst thing they can do is tell you to come back and board later. But the best solution I've seen for this is actually used by JetBlue in New York Airport, JFK, where they actually have this set of boarding system and the chronological order of the groups that are boarding displayed on their screen up above, so everyone can see. There's no reliant on the announcements. There's no reliant on whether the board is held up high enough to get over people's heads. It's up there for users to see at the gate. So what happened here is I was introduced to our Office of Accessibility Inclusion at Emirates, and I told them of my experience when travelling, which, as someone who has travelled a lot, has turned into quite a lot of varied experiences. And I actually wrote a report out of them detailing what happened at each stage along the journey for me. And this sparked an idea. The people within this office, they were surprised by some of these, not because they thought they got everything right with the service, but they just didn't necessarily know. They hadn't experienced it themselves. And it was almost like I could bring a different lens to it. So this born the idea of a project initiative around travel experience for people who were deaf or hard of hearing. And the vision of this project for me was to create a travel experience where, in this case, Emirates customers who are deaf or hard of hearing feel safe, supported and confident to explore the world. This project itself consisted of various levels of research, both from the desk research, so this would be what's out there in blogs, what's published in news, what's in case studies, and what's even in academic reports. So I scoured through that for the trends, the themes, what the key pain points were, what potential opportunities there were for improvement, or ways to make this experience more inclusive, similar to that of what we saw of the boarding screen. I'm lucky enough within Emirates that we have social intelligence experts. So these are guys that work within customer research that can pull this kind of data on what our customers are saying there and then and now. It's quite interesting to compare the two. You have the stuff that's been published, that's out there for all to view, versus the conversations that are happening right now, and how people who are deaf and hard of hearing are supporting each other, even by way of suggestions of how to deal with situations that they're in, or how best to be confident in their travels. So I've touched on my personal account, but then also we have things like the customer feedback data. There are always complaints, but there are also compliments. If you are someone who finds this kind of situation difficult, and you find yourself in a position where someone has really made a difference for you, it is something you remember. So there are examples of compliments that have come in, which is wonderful to see. Now, what I was very keen to do here was not to just go across the customer experience, but also that of what's happening for the people on the front line. They are very much aware of some of these issues, and they see it on a day-to-day basis, but also from a service delivery point of view, what are the pain points for them in terms of actually delivering this service for this kind of customer. So we had surveys from the cabin crew, staff workshops, and then also some deeper dives to go off the back of that. So from all of this, all this information feeded into then a customer journey map, profiling, the service blueprint, which the final delivery will be the report and the recommendations. What I will touch on here is a little bit of point around social listening, or social intelligence, and where the softwares like the ones that can actually pull this kind of information for you, the platforms designed for this, they are excellent at things that are text. They can scour the net and pull that kind of information for you. But what they can't necessarily do is pull from the visual. So your platforms such as your Instagram and your TikTok, they are an unbelievable wealth of information and resource. And quite interestingly enough, as people who are deaf and hard of hearing, they tend to actually take to the visual communication methods better than most. I think it's just by way of natural progression into that. So they're incredible source of insight. So if you are doing a project like this and your boss comes over and sits there, sees you sat there on TikTok or Instagram, you can say it's for Just Cause. It's a very good research place, and I would highly recommend it. So something that really did come out of this, which actually surprised me, was this was incredibly therapeutic for me, because I haven't met many other deaf or hard of hearing people in my life. So for a long time, I thought this was very much just me. So to see that it wasn't just me, and there were also people with had similar struggles, and it was hard work for them too, was a wonderful feeling to know that I wasn't alone in this. I will touch on customer profiling. So for myself, as I explained earlier, I sort of live between the both worlds. My main form of communication is speech, but I can sign. I am a hearing aid wearer of a certain type of hearing aid that is for conductive hearing loss. And I have been I was born deaf, so it's something I've always had and not necessarily had to adapt to, just that is how I've known life. But this isn't the case for everyone. And I think it's very easy to sort of prescribe certain solutions, thinking it's going to help everyone. And that's not necessarily the case. This is not an insult on any organisations that come up with these solutions. I think they're all very important, but it's important to imbue them in the wider context. So let's take, for example, hearing loops, which are often in airports. Most common, you'll see that they're for T loops, but that will only work for a certain type of hearing aid. And that doesn't necessarily work for every type of hearing aid someone has. So it's very easy to think that, right, here's our solution. But I think it's important to try and think of it in the wider context, and when we are thinking about customers, see it as a spectrum of need, not just pigeonholing into different sections. Similar with sign language, I've said that my main form of communication is speech. Some it might be sign, or some it could be a bit in between. So, how that all worked out in practice, as you can see from here, this became the massive piece I produced. This came something like 2 meters long when it got printed, so I definitely used up a few forests in the process of this. And I mapped out the journey, both in terms of what I'm going to say the standard actions taken by a customer versus the adaptations that, in my case, a passenger who's deaf or hard of hearing might have to adapt to. We also mapped that out against the service to see at what stage who was responsible for delivering what, which in the case of a travel journey can be the airline, could be the airport, could be security, could be customs, etc., etc. So there's a lot of stakeholders involved. These became living documents, something that constantly got iterated and added to as more and more of the information came in and plotted against the parts of the journey that it was relevant to. But what was key here was identifying reoccurring themes, whether that be in terms of the training for staff, whether that be in terms of service and operations, or whether that be from an information and communications point of view. And then from that, it turned into this idea of design service concepts. So instead of sort of prescribing, like I said, a particular solution, we would think about it as a whole. So is it a alternative, let's call it alternative communications, where you have something that at the moment is only in audio announcements. What's the alternative for someone who couldn't hear those audio announcements? What is the short-term thing we could do, and what are the longer term? So you remember, just like with Rosa, she started off with a small something and built off of that, and over time that becomes a suite of things we can work with for our service. So I actually had a bit of a bigger goal with this. What I wanted it to become is a reusable framework for exploring other customer needs. So it could be, I could do it from the perspective of hearing loss, but there's lots of other customer journeys that could be based upon. And I know you're thinking, but if we did this for every single customer, it would take forever. I agree. So my idea here would be you flip this. So instead of taking each customer journey and seeing what the customer would do at each point for every single type, I want you to think of it less of like a customer and think of it as, does this part of your service, is it usable? So we have things like the digital web accessibility standards, and they help us answer things like, can someone complete the task? But we don't want someone to just complete a task. We want someone to feel confident about experiencing it. So what I've built out by way of this template is for every sense you add in, for every touch point you go across, would the customer still be able to experience the same quality of service if one of these senses or abilities, now I'm saying take smell and taste with a pinch of salt here, but against these other ones, your hearing, your vision, what if they didn't speak the language that was there, if they're not that confident on digital or literacy or physical capability or just cognitive load, would they still experience the same quality of service? So, South Africa, where I discovered that this was something that I was passionate about and I wanted people to get the most out of it, to Rosa showing me that what it felt like to be on the receiving end, to the travel experience and service design, they're the same. So it's about curiosity, it's observation, it's empathy. So people are having to adapt to our services, but really what we should be doing is finding a way to adapt our services so people no longer have to. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Joanna, thank you so much for that inspiring and motivating talk, but also very, very insightful talk. We do have 1 or 2 questions for you. We just get that. Oh yeah, here it is. In your opinion, where do organizations most commonly overlook accessibility in the broader customer journey?
From my experience, what will often happen is they will, I mean, this is rather cynical of me, and it's often not done with any malicious or ill intent, but they can quite often jump on a solution without necessarily looking into actually, does this solution, does that actually solve something for our customers? Yes, it will solve for a certain number, but it's only this problem's still going to be there. Whereas I think if you could flip it into more about thinking, what would happen if one part of this service wasn't available? How would that communicate? How would the issue be communicated to a customer? Then I think that becomes something more scalable and manageable, because then you're focusing on each sort of, shall we say, object orientated, as necessarily getting bogged down into a PR piece.
Thank you, Joe. We've got the next one from Lebo. Which industries do you think are leading or lagging when it comes to inclusive service design?
Oh, good question. Do you know what? The ones that lead are usually the ones that surprise you the most. I say, in some ways, technology. I will say that because that has enabled me to. They are leading, in many ways have enabled, because that is something we can very almost quickly fix. We have very sort of set guidelines to work against that are becoming more and more legislated. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we had that for service design? There are, in elements of it, governments are very pro it. I will shout out a little bit to the UK government. They do lead a lot by way of that. But you will find that things like leading in service design that's accessible it's sort of in small pockets, as opposed to international guidelines to follow. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it's supposed to be, where do you feel the biggest opportunities are for service or inclusive design in the future?
Well, I'm going to be very biased here and say travel, because I feel why should you be restricted? Why should you feel that you're limited by any of that? Do you know what? I often think of hearing loss as a bit of a superpower, because selective hearing is quite literally selective. If I don't want to listen to things, sometimes I won't. So, yeah, I think that's one place. I think more and more companies even hire people with, let's say, a different view, a different way of looking at things. Now, yes, I've put the lens on it from a hearing perspective, but this is not to say that, let's take my boarding example. This is not to say that just having the text version of who's boarding when would only help me. I'm sure it would help many people. You know, scientifically, I think when you're tired, your ears don't work as well anyway. So that could be for many people that are up at 2 a.m. at the airport because they've got the red eye flight. So why should we not improve it for all?